Up from the ashes of the Big East Conference is the American Athletic Conference. Here to talk about it is the new conference's commissioner, Mike Aresco. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Greg. Pleased to be here.
All right, it's good to have you. Tell me about the American Athletic Conference. Who's in it? What's it all about?
Well, first of all, we have core members from what we term as the old Big East, UConn, Cincinnati, South Florida. We added Temple last year. Temple had been a football member of the Big East at one time. And then we've added, 8 other schools coming in. Navy, and then we have schools such as SMU and Houston and Memphis and UCF, Central Florida, Southern Florida, USF. South Florida, actually, I shouldn't say Southern Florida. I should, my own teams, and East Carolina. East Carolina is another team that's coming in next year. Tulane will be joining us. I hope I haven't forgotten anybody, but we have again, we have a good group of schools. They play both football and basketball in our league, except for Navy, which will play football only. So our interests are more aligned. The old Big East, as you know, had a number of basketball-only schools, 7 plus Notre Dame, 8 schools that played only basketball in the league. And it was a difficult thing because those schools were buffeted by the winds of realignment, which, as you know, has been football-driven. So our new group, again, with Houston and SMU and schools like that, and Memphis, have good football, good tradition. We think we have beachfront property in Florida with USF, South Florida, and also UCF. So we think we've got a good core and a good foundation.
And how do you intend to market this conference? Are you going to leverage some of the rivalries of the old Big East, or is it going to start brand new?
I think we're going to do both. We're starting as a fresh, new conference, a reinvented conference. We're a core NCAA conference. We haven't lost any of our automatic qualifying status, so we have to be careful about how we term ourselves. But we're going to make sure that we emphasize that, for instance, UConn has had the long history and tradition that they've had. We're going to make sure that we know that people know that Cincinnati, for instance, has been a long-time successful member of the conference. We're also going to emphasize new rivalries, such as, again, in Florida, Central Florida and South Florida. Those two schools have enormous potential in football. The two Texas schools, SMU and Houston, will become rivals. So we're gonna make sure people understand that we have a core group of very, very strong schools academically that want to compete at the highest level. They've come together. Realignment's changed a lot of conferences, so it's not new, but it does mean that obviously you have to get used to some new names.
And you still have that TV deal with ESPN. ESPN recently laid off a number of employees because of the rising cost of sports rights, because NBC is getting in the business, CBS is getting in the business with their own sports channels. How does this affect the game, and how does it affect TV on sports?
Yeah, Greg, I don't think it'll have any immediate effect. The rights fees are locked in for many years. ESPN spends a lot of money, obviously, buying rights to major sports leagues, not just obviously college leagues, but pro as well. I think people have speculated over the years that at some point, the money will dry up, that there'll be saturation, people won't watch as much. But the cable model has created a huge demand for sports. It's also a model that means that a lot of networks can work even when you don't have large viewership. Therefore, and a network like ESPN, which does have large viewership, obviously capitalizes on their sub fees, and they have plenty of money. The issue is, and I can't tell you about their business, they may have some issues in terms of staffing that they had to address. But in terms of our league, we're thrilled to be with ESPN because they're going to give us tremendous exposure, and nothing is going to change about that going forward at all, despite what happens there.
And that's how it affects TV, but what about how it affects the fans? A lot of disgruntled original Big East fans here because they think that everything is just coming down to football money. No one cares about basketball anymore. You're losing some great core members of the Big East. It's kind of sad for a lot of people.
Yeah, Greg, realignment's been driven by football, but that's in part because the tournament is where the money is in basketball. You've got a rights fee of, it's not quite $1 billion a year, but there's a lot of money bound up in the NCAA tournament, and that's shared by all the schools. So there isn't as much money in regular season college basketball as there is in football. So football has driven a lot of the realignment, obviously. But it doesn't mean that basketball's been neglected. It just means that unfortunately teams have realigned because they know that, frankly, football drives it, and they want to be part of certain conferences that have good football.
And where will the American Athletic Conference tournaments be? Will it be back in Madison Square Garden where the Big East tournament was?
No, it won't be. No, we decided that ultimately we don't have as big a presence in the Northeast as we once had. We'll find a good site. We've got a couple now, that we're looking at, men's and women's. We have a few finalists. We'll end up in a good place where we think we'll have good attendance. It'll be a venue our fans and our teams want to go to. We'll end up making, I think, a good impact early on.
And then finally, we talked about the networks, we talked about the fans. What about the student athletes? You're going to have student athletes flying from Storrs, Connecticut, down to Houston, down to New Orleans and Tulane. Mm-hmm. Doesn't that seem like it's quite a trip for kids who should be studying?
Well, first of all, in football, you don't have that many road games, so football sort of takes care of itself to some extent. Also, our geographical footprint, while it's a little larger than it was, it's more coherent, and it's not that much bigger, frankly, than the other major conferences. If you look at ACC, Miami up to Boston, Pac-12. Now, that doesn't mean there's not some distance involved. But in terms of Olympic sports, we plan our schedules a certain way so that we minimize travel. And, that brings me back to something I think is really important, Greg. It's about the student athletes. We forget that sometimes with all this realignment, with all the money washing around. And the issue for us is to make sure that obviously the travel is contained. We try to plan that. In basketball, for instance, we've got 2 teams in Texas, so when a basketball team makes a trip, they can play in both places. We're going to try to do the same thing in Florida. We're going to try to do the same thing with Memphis and Cincinnati, where you have geographical, closeness. And what I think will happen is we'll plan schedules to minimize travel. That'll be very important.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike. Good luck.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for watching The Street.